Ethan Carter's mornings always began with the gentle rustling of leaves and the warm glow of sunrise over his beloved suburban haven. A decorated military veteran turned dedicated city official, Ethan found solace in the quiet rhythms of daily life. His home, an old colonial house lovingly maintained over decades, was not just brick and mortar. It was a living archive of memories, laughter, and hard-won victories over life's challenges. It was here that Ethan raised his daughter, Lily, whose sparkling eyes and resilient spirit shone even brighter against the backdrop of her disabilities. Despite the extra challenges she faced, Lily's joyful presence filled every corner of their yard, where she often played, her laughter mingling with the chirp of birds. The neighborhood, meticulously manicured and governed by a strict homeowners association, was a picture of suburban order, until Kerren arrived. Kerren Hargrove, self-appointed guardian of community standards and de facto president of the HOA board, prided herself on an unwavering devotion to rules she interpreted in the most punishing ways possible. With a steely gaze and an air of entitlement, Kerren patrolled the streets like a small-town sheriff, ensuring every hedge was trimmed to perfection and every yard met her ever-escalating vision of aesthetic purity. One bright Saturday morning, as Lily energetically maneuvered around the flower beds on her motorized tricycle, Ethan watched from the back porch with pride and concern. For Lily, the backyard was an open invitation to explore, to engage with the world on her own terms. But that same morning, as she giggled and navigated a gentle slope, a dark figure emerged at the gate. Kerren had come, her eyes narrowed in disapproval as she took in the sight of Lily, whose wheelchair and adaptive equipment were a part of her everyday reality. "Lily, what are you doing out here?" Kerren demanded sharply, stepping forward with a clipboard clutched in her hand. Her tone was condescending and accusatory, as if a child playing in a yard were inherently a nuisance. Ethan's heart pounded. Before he could rise to defend his daughter, Kerren continued, "This isn't a playground for your special circumstances. It's a pristine community. We have standards, Mr. Carter." Ethan's voice came out firm but controlled. "Lily is my daughter, and she deserves to play where she wants. Our home is our sanctuary. My duty as a father is to ensure her happiness and safety. Your rules cannot infringe upon that right." The confrontation quickly escalated. Neighbors began peeking from behind trimmed hedges and manicured lawns. Kerren's eyes flashed with indignation as she recited a list of regulations written in a thick legal tone, dismissing Ethan's pleas as mere excuses. "You're in violation of multiple HOA guidelines, and I won't allow your personal choices to tarnish the community's image. This yard isn't a personal playground. It's a shared space that demands conformity." Ethan, used to handling conflict both on and off duty, tried to reason with her. "I follow every rule, except those that undermine basic rights and human decency. Lily's play isn't a violation, it's life. And frankly, you're overstepping." Kerren's face reddened with indignation. "Overstepping? I'm simply enforcing the community's standards that you agreed to abide by when you moved in." Her tone was icy, each word punctuated by a dismissive gesture toward Lily's wheelchair. In that moment, it was clear, this wasn't just about a simple infraction. It was a declaration of war against a family that dared to live differently. As Ethan stepped down from his porch to stand face-to-face with Kerren, he realized that this was not an isolated dispute. It was the opening salvo in what would become a relentless campaign of bullying, harassment, and abuse of power. A campaign that would test his resolve and shake the very foundations of the community's supposed order. In that fraught moment, with his daughter's laughter and the rustle of the morning breeze serving as both soundtrack and reminder of what he was fighting for, Ethan silently vowed that no rule, no matter how obscure, could strip away the simple right of a child to enjoy life. The tension was palpable. Kerren's rigid stance clashed with Ethan's heartfelt defense, setting the stage for an ongoing battle between authoritarian imposition and the compassionate assertion of personal freedom. The seeds of distrust and animosity had been sown, and as the neighbors watched on, it was clear that the status quo was about to be challenged in ways no one could have predicted. The following morning, As a drizzle of rain blurred the edges of Ethan's cherished home, an envelope with official insignia arrived on his doorstep. Inside lay a $750 fine, issued for excessive disruption and aesthetic violations, a vague charge meant to punish what Kerren deemed unacceptable. The document, adorned with bureaucratic legalese and the unmistakable flourish of the HOA seal, left no room for ambiguity. Ethan had broken the rules. Kerren, stationed at the front gate as if on patrol duty, watched Ethan's reaction with a smug satisfaction. "The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Carter," she declared, arms folded with a haughty tilt of her chin. "You're endangering the community's tranquility by flaunting your disregard for our standards." Ethan, still reeling from the previous day's confrontation, felt a swell of anger mixed with sorrow as he recalled Lily's bright smile moments before Kerren's intrusion. "This fine is absurd," he replied calmly, yet firmly. "I'm not in the habit of breaking rules. My daughter is simply playing, enjoying the freedom every child deserves." Kerren sneered, her eyes narrowing. "Enjoyment is irrelevant when it disrupts the order of our community. You must comply with our guidelines or further action will be taken." With that, she turned on her heel and stalked back toward the row of pristine hedges, leaving behind a silence filled with uncertainty. Not one to be intimidated, Ethan took immediate action. He contacted local zoning authorities, citing the vague and unsubstantiated nature of the fine. "We are a community built on respect and reason," he explained to the official on the phone. "I've received a fine for a violation that is non-existent in local law. I expect a thorough review." Within hours, the tranquility of the neighborhood was shattered by the arrival of inspectors. Uniformed officials began scrutinizing every inch of Ethan's property, meticulously checking for infractions that might justify Kerren's draconian measures. Neighbors, previously quiet and complacent, whispered amongst themselves, some in support of Ethan, others too intimidated to question the HOA's authority. Kerren, clearly emboldened by her initial success, took every opportunity to parade her authority. At every turn, she reiterated the rules, her tone dripping with superiority. "If you don't fix your property, if you don't adhere to the standards, you're going to face even harsher penalties," she warned. Each visit from an inspector was followed by a pointed reminder from Kerren that Ethan's noncompliance was unacceptable. In a public display of entitlement, Kerren organized an impromptu meeting at the community clubhouse that very afternoon. Residents gathered in hesitant clusters, unsure whether to side with the strict enforcer or the gentle, principled father who was now fighting for not only his rights, but for those of every resident who felt marginalized by the HOA's overreach. Amid the hushed conversations, Ethan stood and addressed the assembly. "I respect our community standards," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "But these rules must not be used as a weapon against a family or as a tool for personal vendettas." The tension in the room was electric. Kerren, seated at the head of a table, dismissed his words with a cold smile. "This isn't personal, Mr. Carter. It's about maintaining the integrity of our neighborhood." But her voice betrayed an undercurrent of arrogance, as if she believed no one could challenge her authority. That very day, social media began buzzing with whispers of Ethan's plight. Posts on local forums and neighborhood groups questioned the legitimacy of the fine and decried the apparent bias of the HOA. In one post, a resident wrote, "If they fine a family for letting their child play, what's next?" Banning laughter. The virtual uprising was small at first, but it was enough to plant a seed of resistance against the tyranny of Kerren's rule. As dusk fell and the rain tapered off, Ethan returned home with a heavy heart but a resolute spirit. The fine and the barrage of official visits were clear messages. The HOA, led by Kerren, was determined to enforce conformity by any means necessary. Yet in the soft glow of his living room, as Lily's gentle giggles floated from the backyard, Ethan vowed that he would not let this abuse of power define his family's life. Every piece of evidence, every conversation with the inspectors, and every unfair demand would be documented. He knew that this was just the beginning of a long battle, a battle for fairness, dignity, and the simple right of a disabled child to enjoy her play in the open air. In the days that followed, Kerren's tactics grew bolder. What began as isolated fines and official warnings quickly transformed into a systematic siege. Ethan began to notice a disturbing pattern: anonymous complaints, suspicious donations to HOA funds, and an unsettling silence from some of the board members. Rumors began to circulate among the neighbors, whispers that Kerren was diverting funds and engineering false violations to target any homeowner who dared step out of line. Late one evening, as Ethan pored over the fines' legal jargon and obscure neighborhood bylaws, a soft knock came at his door. It was Mr. Rodriguez, a longtime resident known for his quiet support of Ethan's views. "There's something you need to know," Mr. Rodriguez confided in a hushed tone. "I've heard that Kerren's been using the HOA money for her own interests. And worse, some board members have started questioning her methods, but she silences them with threats." That revelation lit a spark within Ethan. Determined to unearth the truth, he began a meticulous investigation. He set up a small camera discreetly at the edge of his property, capturing every interaction between Kerren and the board members, as well as every unexpected visit by inspectors. His goal was clear: gather irrefutable evidence of corruption and abuse of power. Meanwhile, the anonymous complaints against his property piled up, each one citing vague infractions that made little sense and none of which could be substantiated by local ordinances. Matters escalated on a particularly overcast afternoon when a new notice arrived: a threat of eviction if Ethan did not remedy his property's deficiencies within 72 hours. Reading the notice aloud, Ethan's voice wavered with a mixture of disbelief and determination. "This isn't about compliance, it's about control," he muttered under his breath, already formulating a plan to counteract the extortion. But the most galling incident was yet to come. As Lily rolled along the sidewalk on her tricycle, laughing and oblivious to the storm brewing, a figure in a crisp uniform approached. It was not one of the regular inspectors, but someone sent by the HOA to intervene directly. Without any warning or explanation, the uniformed individual grabbed Lily's tricycle, insisting that her play was causing a public disturbance. "This is an HOA violation," he barked, as Ethan rushed to intervene. The altercation was swift but jarring. Kerren, watching from a distance, smiled thinly as if witnessing the unfolding of her master plan. Fueled by anger and protectiveness, Ethan confronted the intruder, demanding an explanation and citing every local law that guaranteed his daughter the right to play. The inspector, clearly intimidated by Ethan's calm yet forceful rebuttals, muttered something about guidelines before retreating with Lily's tricycle in tow. The incident left Lily teary-eyed and Ethan seething. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about a family's dignity under siege. Determined to document every transgression, Ethan began logging every conversation, every letter, every encounter. His investigation revealed a disturbing nexus of corruption. The HOA's funds were being funneled into unauthorized projects, and Kerren was at the center of it all. Some board members, previously silent, had grown disillusioned by her heavy-handed methods. In whispered confidences in the hallway of the community center, they hinted at irregularities in how fines were imposed and funds allocated, a web of deceit that ensnared not only Ethan's family but many others in the community. As the evidence mounted, Ethan reached out to a local journalist, known for exposing municipal corruption. Late one night, in a cramped diner booth illuminated by a single overhead light, Ethan shared his documented evidence, photographs, audio clips, and copies of internal memos. The journalist's eyes widened in astonishment. "This is explosive," she said. "Your story is not just about one family's struggle. It's about a corrupt system that preys on the vulnerable." The stakes had never been higher. Kerren's campaign was no longer a matter of petty neighborhood disputes. It had evolved into an all-out power play. With every new violation, every unexplained complaint, Ethan's resolve hardened. He realized that in order to protect Lily and reclaim the sanctity of his home, he would have to expose the corruption at its very core. And as he organized his evidence and rallied the support of sympathetic neighbors and media contacts alike, he knew that the coming days would determine not only his family's future, but also the fate of the entire community. The next morning dawned in chaos. Ethan awoke to find his driveway being inexplicably excavated. Massive machinery had been parked on the street, and workers, uninvited and unidentifiable, were already digging as if preparing to tear apart the very foundation of his home. A hastily scrawled note on his door read, "HOA expansion. Immediate compliance required." Panic surged through him. This was beyond any acceptable regulation. It was clear that Kerren, in her warped interpretation of community improvement, had gone too far. Ethan raced outside, Lily's hand firmly in his, as neighbors gathered in alarm. "What is happening?" one shouted. Kerren emerged from a convoy of vehicles with an air of smug defiance. "Your property is slated for an expansion project," she announced coldly, as if it were a routine announcement rather than an illegal takeover. "If you do not cooperate, you will be forced to vacate immediately." Anger and disbelief warred within Ethan. "This is extortion," he shouted back. "Your expansion is a cover for seizing my property, and it violates every right I have as a homeowner and a parent." The confrontation escalated rapidly in front of the watching crowd, with cameras flashing from mobile phones and whispers rippling through the gathered residents. Ethan stepped forward. "I have legal documents proving that this so-called expansion is unauthorized," he declared, brandishing a thick folder of evidence he had compiled over months. "The city has no record of any such project, and your actions are nothing more than an illegal power grab." At that moment, a hush fell over the crowd. Board members, who had long been cowed by Kerren's domineering personality, began to exchange uneasy glances. Some even stepped forward, voicing their doubts about the legitimacy of the HOA's actions. "I didn't sign up for this kind of tyranny," murmured one longtime resident, emboldened by Ethan's confrontation. Kerren's eyes darted around, her confident facade beginning to crumble. "Aye," she stuttered, but was cut off by a chorus of disapproval from the assembled neighbors. Ethan's calm determination had sparked a collective defiance. With the evidence laid bare, the public meeting that afternoon transformed into an impromptu town hall. Neighbors recounted their own experiences of unfair fines, arbitrary inspections, and invasive demands. Each story painted a picture of an HOA that had lost its way, a once well-intentioned organization now turned into an instrument of intimidation. In the midst of the public uproar, Ethan took center stage. "We deserve better," he proclaimed. "Our homes, our families, and especially our children must be allowed to live free from fear and harassment." His words resonated deeply, particularly among those who had silently suffered under Kerren's reign. For Ethan, this was not only a legal battle, it was a fight for human dignity. The public confrontation culminated in a decision, a motion to demand an independent audit of the HOA's actions and finances. As the meeting drew to a close, the residents resolved to stand together. Ethan's file, brimming with photographs of unauthorized construction, recorded conversations of threats, and copies of the unlawful notices, would serve as the cornerstone for their collective action. Meanwhile, Kerren's face, once a mask of unyielding authority, now revealed hints of panic. Even as she tried to regroup, the community had begun to reclaim its voice. That very evening, as twilight settled over the neighborhood, Ethan sat with Lily on the back porch. The soft murmur of conversation from neighbors determined to hold the HOA accountable provided a bittersweet comfort. "We'll fix this, sweetheart," he whispered, stroking her hair. "No one has the right to take away your laughter or the beauty of this home." In the gathering darkness, a sense of hope emerged. Ethan's brave stand had not only challenged the HOA's overreach, but had ignited a fire in the hearts of the community. Kerren's extreme measures were met with an even more extreme response, a united front of residents unwilling to accept tyranny disguised as order. And in that small, defiant act of resistance, the battle lines were drawn for what would become a fight for justice that no one in the community would soon forget. Just when it seemed that the scales might finally be tipping in favor of fairness, Kerren launched one last desperate offensive. Late one afternoon, as the neighborhood tried to recover from the previous day's public rebuke, Kerren arrived at Ethan's property in an unmarked sedan. Her eyes, wild with determination and anger, betrayed her inner panic as she marched toward the back door. Earlier that day, Lily had been playing quietly near the garden, a ritual that had come to symbolize both freedom and defiance in the face of arbitrary rules. As she maneuvered her tricycle along the winding garden path, her laughter, delicate and unburdened, filled the air. Suddenly, a harsh voice cut through the gentle ambience. "Stop that noise at once." Kerren's cry rang out, echoing with hostility. Without warning, she lunged forward, her hand outstretched as if to seize control, and perhaps something more sinister. Ethan's heart froze. In an instant, the scene transformed into a nightmare. Kerren's eyes locked onto Lily as she reached out aggressively, her actions no longer confined to bureaucratic overreach, but crossing a line into direct, physical aggression. "You shouldn't be out here playing, especially someone like you." Kerren spat, her tone laced with a venom that was both personal and utterly unacceptable. Before Ethan could react, Lily trembled with fear, her play halted abruptly by Kerren's invasive intrusion. In that charged moment, neighbors rushed out of their homes, the sound of footsteps and shouted warnings melding with a rising panic. "Leave her alone," Ethan bellowed, sprinting across the lawn with a mix of desperation and fury. The confrontation was chaotic, a flurry of shouts, scattered belongings, and the unmistakable sound of a camera's shutter as bystanders recorded every second of the unfolding abuse. In the midst of the turmoil, Ethan managed to grab hold of Kerren's arm, halting her advance. "This is beyond a mere dispute over property rules," he declared, his voice shaking with emotion. "You have no right to threaten my child, to terrorize this neighborhood with your hate." His words reverberated across the gathered crowd, their shock evident in every wide-eyed stare and whispered conversation. One of the neighbors, a quick-thinking resident, pulled out their phone and immediately began streaming live video to social media. The raw footage captured every anguished cry, every enraged shout from Ethan, and the look of grim determination on Kerren's face as she realized her actions were being witnessed by the entire community. In that instant, Kerren's desperate move was no longer a private act of bullying. It was a public spectacle of cruelty, broadcast for all to see. Within minutes, police sirens wailed in the distance. It wasn't long before uniformed officers arrived on the scene. Kerren, still struggling in Ethan's grip, was forced to face the full force of the law. "You are under arrest for assault and harassment, among other charges," one officer stated firmly as he cuffed her, the reality of her downfall sinking in with every clink of the metal. As Kerren was led away, the gathered residents let out a collective sigh of relief, a sound that mingled triumph with sorrow over what had transpired. Ethan, though shaken and tearful at the sight of his daughter's frightened eyes, felt a measure of vindication. The evidence of Kerren's abuse, captured in vivid detail by the community, would soon serve as undeniable proof in the legal proceedings that were already underway. Later that evening, as the police took Kerren away in a patrol car, whispers of disbelief and righteous anger spread like wildfire. The very person who had once enforced the community's rules with ruthless precision now found herself ensnared by her own arrogance and cruelty. And as Ethan comforted Lily, softly reassuring her that she was safe, he silently vowed that every piece of evidence, the recorded video, the testimonies of neighbors, and the damning documentation of the HOA's abuse, would be used to dismantle the corrupt system that had allowed such tyranny to flourish. That day, Kerren's final, desperate move not only sealed her fate, but also galvanized the community. The attack on Lily, a moment that could have shattered the spirit of a family, instead became the catalyst for a long overdue reckoning. The battle for justice was no longer just about property lines or aesthetic standards. It was about protecting the vulnerable, defending the dignity of every individual, and ensuring that no one would ever again be terrorized in the name of order. In the days that followed Kerren's arrest, the community rallied like never before. What had once been a neighborhood held in a paralyzing grip of fear and conformity now pulsed with a new energy, a collective resolve to reclaim their rights and dignity. Public meetings erupted into impassioned forums where residents shared stories of past abuses and vowed never to let the HOA's tyranny continue unchecked. Ethan's file of evidence became the cornerstone of the community's uprising. At a specially convened town hall meeting, several long-suffering residents stood up and recounted their own experiences of harassment, unjust fines, intrusive inspections, and arbitrary punishments that had become the norm under Kerren's iron-fisted leadership. One by one, they detailed how Kerren's decisions had not only violated property rights, but had also hurt the very fabric of the community. "I've seen neighbors driven to tears over fines for the smallest infraction," one elderly resident recalled, voice trembling with emotion. "It's time we say enough is enough." The turning point came when the local council, spurred by the mounting evidence and growing public outcry, announced a full-scale investigation into the HOA's practices. The independent audit revealed a labyrinth of financial irregularities and unauthorized projects, evidence that Kerren had been siphoning funds for her personal gain while imposing draconian rules on the residents. The audit report, widely circulated and broadcast at community meetings, was the final nail in the coffin of the corrupt regime. Under mounting pressure, several board members resigned in protest, and what remained of the HOA was forced to dissolve. In a final act of poetic justice, Kerren was not only removed from any position of authority, but was also held liable for her actions. The fines imposed on the HOA, once levied against unsuspecting homeowners, were rechanneled to compensate the victims of her abuse, and a class action lawsuit, spearheaded by Ethan and a coalition of determined residents, secured a settlement that would help restore the community's trust and rebuild damaged lives. On a bright, clear morning just a week after Kerren's arrest, Ethan sat on his porch with Lily playing safely in the yard, her laughter a soft counterpoint to the echo of recent events. Neighbors strolled by, exchanging relieved smiles and warm greetings, as if a long, dark chapter had finally been closed. The once oppressive atmosphere had given way to a palpable sense of freedom and renewal, a reminder that true community is built on fairness, empathy, and the courage to stand up against injustice. For Ethan, the victory was bittersweet. The scars left by the relentless harassment would not vanish overnight, but the resolution of the legal battles and the crumbling of the corrupt HOA were signs of a new beginning. As he sipped his morning coffee, he couldn't help but feel a quiet pride in how his family, and indeed the entire neighborhood, had fought back. "We did it," he murmured to himself, thinking of Lily's innocent smile and the community's newfound hope. Kerren's downfall was complete. The evidence of her abuse was clear in every document and every broadcasted video. The legal system, now fully aware of the extent of her misconduct, had no choice but to hold her accountable. As news of the HOA's collapse spread throughout the region, residents from neighboring communities expressed solidarity, and what had begun as a local dispute transformed into a symbol of resistance against unchecked authority. The collapse of the HOA wasn't just a victory for Ethan or his neighbors. It was a triumph of community spirit over despotic rule. The oppressive structure, once built on arbitrary rules and personal vendettas, was dismantled piece by piece, leaving behind a blueprint for fairness and accountability that would guide the community for years to come. In the weeks that followed the public uprising, the full legal ramifications of the HOA's actions became impossible to ignore. The City Council, spurred by the independent audit and overwhelming resident testimonies, moved swiftly to impose severe penalties. An investigation was launched not only into Kerren's personal misconduct, but into the entire HOA's operations. Several board members were summoned for questioning, and the once feared institution was effectively dissolved by state authorities. Ethan emerged as a reluctant local hero. His unwavering commitment to justice had set the wheels of accountability in motion. With the support of a dedicated legal team and a wave of community backing, he helped spearhead a class action lawsuit against the HOA. The case, which detailed systematic abuse of power, financial misappropriation, and violations of homeowners' rights, quickly became a landmark in local jurisprudence. As the court proceedings unfolded, evidence gathered from every corner of the neighborhood was laid out. Testimonies from residents, recorded footage of Kerren's confrontations, and the audit report all painted a damning picture of corruption. The judge's stern rebuke of the HOA's actions resonated throughout the courtroom. This is a clear abuse of power. No one is above the law. The ruling not only ordered hefty fines, but also mandated restitution to all affected homeowners. For Ethan, the legal victory was more than personal redemption. It was a victory for the entire community. His final move, ensuring that every illegal fine and abusive action would be nullified, symbolized the triumph of truth over tyranny. Even as Kerren's name became synonymous with overreach, the legal process served as a powerful reminder that accountability would always prevail. With the legal hammer falling hard, Kerren's once imposing image crumbled into insignificance. The media, once enamored with her self-righteous proclamations, now portrayed her as a cautionary tale, a tyrant undone by her own unchecked arrogance. In hushed conversations at neighborhood gatherings, residents recalled how Kerren had once ruled with an iron fist, only to find herself isolated and disgraced. Kerren's personal life mirrored her professional downfall. The mounting legal fees, the public humiliation, and the isolation from a community that had once feared her culminated in a series of personal disasters. Her car was repossessed, her credit shattered by fines and legal penalties, and rumors began swirling about estrangement from her family. In a bitter twist of fate, she was forced to leave her beloved home, a home she had once flaunted as a symbol of authority, only to be seen trying to secure a position at another HOA, a role that the community would never again tolerate. Ethan, while sympathetic to the collateral damage caused by Kerren's abuse, felt a quiet satisfaction at the justice served. Sometimes, he said with measured calm to a small group of supportive neighbors, karma is the most powerful force of all. His tone was not one of triumph over personal spite, but of a deep conviction that the right to live freely and safely was non-negotiable. The fall of Kerren was complete. No longer did she stand as a beacon of order, but as a stark reminder of what happens when entitlement goes unchecked. Her humiliation was broadcast far and wide, not just in legal documents and news headlines, but in the whispered thanks of a community that had been liberated from tyranny. A few months later, the neighborhood had transformed into a model of unity and resilience. The dark days under the HOA's oppressive rule were now a distant memory, replaced by a sense of empowerment and community spirit. Neighbors gathered regularly, not to grumble about petty fines, but to celebrate their hard-fought victory and plan community events that honored the values of fairness and mutual respect. Ethan often sat on his back porch in the cool of the evening, watching Lily play among friends in a yard that now symbolized freedom rather than surveillance. The scars of the past had faded, replaced by the laughter of children and the gentle murmur of conversations that spoke of better times. Even when someone half in jest handed Ethan a replica of an HOA violation notice, a reminder of absurd regulations long since abolished, he would chuckle and reply, "They really tried." The final mic drop moment came during the neighborhood's annual Day of Community Justice, a celebration born from the struggle against oppression. At a public assembly held in the refurbished community center, Ethan took to the stage one last time. With a calm, measured tone, he recounted the trials and tribulations that had led them here, how a tyrant's abuse had united a neighborhood, sparking change that reached far beyond a single block. As the crowd erupted in cheers, a banner was unveiled that read simply, "Justice, Unity, Freedom." The message, concise yet powerful, encapsulated the spirit of their hard-won victory. In that moment, it wasn't just about a battle against one woman's overreach. It was a declaration that every individual's right to dignity and respect was sacred. And so, with the final chapter written and the echoes of a tyrannical past fading into history, Ethan Carter and his neighbors moved forward with renewed hope. Their lives were forever changed by the lesson that sometimes standing up for what is right, no matter the cost, can dismantle even the most oppressive of regimes. The neighborhood, once held hostage by arbitrary rules, had reclaimed its soul, and as the sun set on that triumphant day, the only sound left was the quiet, unbreakable laughter of a child free to play.